everyday witches emerge from the shadows of secrecy. Broom closets are flinging open and witches are taking flight. Whether you are hiding in your cozy closet or flying with pride, stay for a spell as Witchcasting with Theodora Pendragon and her guests share magical moments, stir the cauldron, and debunk misinformation and misconceptions about paganism, witches, and our wonderful world of magic.
Welcome back to another episode of Witchcasting with Theodora Pendragon. My special guest today is Alexis Donkin The Destructrix. Hello, Alexis.
Hello. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm happy you're here too. You are a psychic.
Yes.
Let's talk about when you discovered your psychic abilities.
I would say there's a difference between when I discovered them versus when I figured out that's what it was. So I've always, from a very early age, I always felt comfortable with death, with the other side of life. You know, I have memories of walking around cemeteries and feeling very safe and very secure in them. And like, it's not a problem for me. A lot of psychic children, what happens is at the age of 7, they have some kind of an experience with a deity or an ascended master that is connected with their particular tradition. So like if you grew up Buddhist, you'd probably interact with Buddha. For me, I grew up in a Christian tradition, so I met Jesus at 7, you know, and I didn't know that that was not normal. And then, you know, I had experiences. My godmother passed when I was rather young, and she was always with me, and I would talk with her, and I didn't, you know, I thought, oh, maybe I'm just making it up. As I got older, it became clear that no, that wasn't made up. That was real. And it took me a long time before I could get comfortable with the idea that, you know, yeah, I know things before they happen, or yes, my dreams come true, or, you know, I just understand things in a different way and interact with the world in a different way. I was having psychic experiences at a very young age, but it wasn't until I was well into adulthood that I started to actually be like, oh, yeah, this is a thing.
Did you think that all the other children were just like you?
I don't know. Like, it just never occurred to me that it was different. I think that happens to a lot of people, is like, you think like, oh, that's just a thing. Even now, sometimes I have those moments where I'm just like, yeah, it's normal to be comfortable with this. I had a conversation recently with a fellow psychic, and I said something about, yeah, I've just been talking about death a lot lately. And I said to her, you probably do that too. And she was like, no, I don't. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess that's just me. So here you go.
When you were a child, did you share this information with anybody?
I did not. Because it's very clear if you watch television or cartoons, you get the message very quickly that if you are different, if you're hearing voices, or if you're like having some kind of inexplicable experience, that is dangerous and that that's not safe. I mean, if you like, I'm thinking especially when I was growing up, there was an X-Men cartoon. And so, you had the main characters were very different and they were always having struggles with that difference. And some of that difference was psychic. Several of the main characters are psychics and they are always kind of hiding and playing with that kind of stuff. So the message from popular culture is that this is not safe. Growing up, my parents are ordained ministers, and they are ordained ministers in a mainline church. So it's kind of Enlightenment thinking. It was safe to question, but there wasn't a lot of experiential aspects to spirituality in that particular tradition. So psychic phenomena was not normal or, part of everyday conversation. So I didn't know anyone who was like that. I didn't know anybody who was openly like me. And so I didn't have anyone to talk to. This was before the internet was a big thing. And even in the early days of the internet, there wasn't access to a lot of these communities that we have now. I mean, we have a lot of spaces where we can talk about spirituality and the ways in which we interact in the world. And we can find communities that fit us all over the place now. But, when we're talking about, the 90s and the early 2000s, and it just wasn't present. I was really pretty isolated. And so I didn't talk about these things. And when I talked about these things, it was very much like, oh, I'm coming out now. And it felt like, I was constantly coming out to people until now where I'm like, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to be, out about this.
You knew you were different.
Yeah.
But you didn't realize you were psychic until you were an adult.
Because I didn't have words to talk about that. Yeah. I would have dreams that would come true. I knew how to lucid dream as a child. I would have clairsentience. I would feel things from other people as a child. But again, I didn't have words to talk about it, and I didn't know how to explain it to other people. So I wouldn't have said I was a psychic until I was much older.
As a psychic, you offer mentorship and psychic insight at crossroads moments. What does that mean?
When people come to me, they come to me when they're at a crossroads, when they feel like there's something they really just don't know what to do. So their relationship is a mess, or they have an unexpected pregnancy, or they're looking at a potential job change or moving, or their family is feeling messy, or they're struggling with their kids or something like that. Some moment that it's just too big and too overwhelming for them to figure it out on their own. And they really need to tap into spirit. They need someone who can affirm where they are. I've also had people struggling with their identity, their sexuality come to me, and I help them find that affirmation and safety and security in that. And that's what spirit does. So when I tap into spirit, I have a number of different readings. I can do a written reading, but I find that the most powerful stuff is when we're having a live session. That's when I can give intuitive hits as we're talking, as well as whatever reading that they are coming to me for. And that's also when I can really hold space for people. I joke that that I was bred for this because my family has a long line of clergy and religious workers. The tools that I use while they are not religious. There's a lot of counseling involved. There's a lot of holding space and loving on people and giving them wisdom that they need by connecting to spirit for them.
I've often heard people say, everybody's psychic to a degree. We just haven't developed the gifts. Is that something that you can help people with?
I would say that everybody's psychic in the way that everybody can play basketball. So anybody can pick up a ball in theory and shoot some hoops, but everybody's not going to be Kobe Bryant. And that's fine. But along those lines, you can still get better. It's still a skill. So we all have the wiring for it, but everybody, doesn't spend time on it. Like form follows function. You'll never find two psychics that are the same because our abilities and our practices are different. We're different people. So the way that our skills present and the techniques we use will be a little bit different from person to person because, as I said, form follows function. So if somebody did want to become more psychic, I can't promise that you'll be Kobe Bryant, but you certainly can improve, just like you can improve any skill. And there's probably the absolute most important thing to do to develop one's abilities is to meditate. You can look at holy texts from a variety of different traditions, and they talk about as you're meditating, you will acquire psychic skills because that's part of the spiritual journey. It's not an end goal. For a lot of traditions, it's not an end goal, it's a step. And so it's a natural part of spiritual development. If you, for example, or anyone listening to this wanted to start developing their psychic gifts, the thing that I would recommend is spending some time meditating. And meditation doesn't have to be sitting and chanting Om. It can be. It can be. If that brings you joy, cool. But if it doesn't, that's okay. Meditation can be walking through nature and just mindfully paying attention to the natural world. Meditation can be dancing and really feeling the music. Meditation can be making art. The point is not what a specific kind of meditation, rather it's to do any kind of meditation on a consistent basis. So that would be my number one recommendation.
What else do you recommend?
If you want to develop certain skills, this would be like after you've kind of noticed things. So let's say that you have some psychic abilities. The main, we could talk about the different ones, but I'm going to just briefly mention the main four that people have. And that's clear seeing, clairvoyance, clear knowing, claircognizance, clear feeling, clairsentience, and clear hearing, clairaudience. So usually when someone has psychic abilities, these are the four main ones that you'll see, and they tend to have one or two that are dominant. So if we're talking about myself, I use all of them, but the one that I tend to use the most frequently and is the most present is my clear seeing, my clairvoyance. So that's visions. I see visions. So if, for example, you were like me and your dominant, the thing that showed up is you start seeing stuff. That's how you first interact with the world in a psychic way. Then you want to practice seeing things. So you might practice by holding an object and trying to connect with that object and seeing it. You might practice seeing things from the perspective of an animal or the perspective of a plant. You might practice seeing auras. There's a number of different ways. It kind of just depends on what feels right for you. If I'm driving down the freeway, sometimes what I'll practice doing is I'll practice seeing the spiritual signature of my environment. And so it's literally like I'm turning on an extra layer of sight. And so I can kind of see the energies around the different objects. That's the best way I can explain it. It's almost like an iridescent kind of shimmer that goes around the different objects and they glow in a different way. And then, of course, there's spirit that's operating on that level, that isn't operating on the material level that I can see at that time. So those are just some different ways that if I was going to practice with clairvoyance, I would practice that. Just the more that you interact with spirit, the easier it will get and the stronger those things will become. But even like my guides that I talk to on a regular basis, they would say, more than anything, you just need to be meditating. If you want to have any kind of psychic stuff, like meditate, please just do that. And then what you need to do after that will present itself. Because again, it's going to vary on what gifts are dominant for you and what feels right for you. And that's going to be kind of the direction that you want to take. There's a lot of psychic schools out there, and a person is welcome to pursue that. It's much more of a traditional setting, and they have specific exercises that they would guide you through. I don't know how helpful that is. I didn't go through that. I just developed naturally and pursued things in a way that felt good and made sense for me. I would argue that that is as important, if not more important, to develop in a way that feels right for you and reflects who you are spiritually, because that is what you are called to do as an incarnated person here. It's more important that you pursue the things that feel good to you. So if it feels good to go to one of those schools, do it. Like, absolutely. But if it also feels good to just kind of naturally like develop and pursue things as it presents itself, do that.
Quite often, people will seek out psychics because they're seeking answers, as you had mentioned earlier. What advice can you give someone on finding a real psychic, a true psychic, versus a fake scammer psychic? Because scammers are out there.
Yes. Yeah, it is a point of frustration for me to have so many people out there who are cons in this area, because people are coming to you and they're vulnerable. And that's just so sad that there are these people that are taking advantage of them. It hurts my heart. One of the things that I think is the most important is that you need to look and see if a person is honest about what they do and they're open about it, and they will share with you what to expect. So if you go to someone, a legitimate psychic will tell you exactly what to expect in a reading. They will be willing to answer any of your questions. They will share with you past clients, testimonials. And when I say share past clients, I mean they will, with consent, ask a past client for you, if this is what you want, to connect with one of these past clients and ask questions to one of them. They're not going to push you. They're not going to cold DM you. They're not going to tell you, oh my God, I have this vision about you that I need to share with you. You need to pay me for it. No. They will never do that. That is like classic scammer. Instead, you need to come to them. They're never going to seek you out directly. You're going to come to them, and they're going to be open about what they can do for you and what they cannot do. I would argue that a legitimate psychic, so how should I put this? It's not that they're not legitimate, but because it's true that some people can and do predict the future. However, I think theologically that is wrong. That's unethical. It's more important for you to get the information that you need in order to take the steps you are meant to take to get where you are meant to go. And so that often means not knowing the future. Also, future casting is hard because there's a lot of variables. So for an ethical, legitimate psychic, they should not tell you the future. It's not actually going to serve you, even if they are correct. and connected to spirit. So those are the things that I would look for, somebody who's honest, somebody who will connect you with their testimonials with past clients, someone you're going to go to them, and someone who's going to be open about what they can do for you and what they cannot.
Passing in spiritual and cultural spaces. How would you define that?
Typically, when we think about passing, we're thinking about someone who passes, someone who is accepted within a spiritual space, but they're not necessarily part of that group. When I'm talking about that for spiritual spaces, that means that I can pass in Christian situations because of my upbringing. However, I do not consider myself to be a Christian at all. And if I got into a conversation with the average Christian, I would probably make them very angry very quickly and very frustrated. And they would probably tell me, in fact, I have been told many times that I would be going to hell because of my all sorts of things.
Of course you are.
Pretty
Yeah.
much. I have taken like screenshots about those different things and been like, because it just amuses me when people they're like, wait a second, you're not? And I'm like, no. I'm pretty sure that most of the stuff that I do on a regular basis would make you run and hide or start throwing holy water or something. But whatever. But on the other hand, I have also been in woo spaces, like I like to call them, or new age spaces, where, we start having conversations. People think I pass there. And then I start talking about what I actually believe. And they're like, oh my God, how can you think that there's anything positive about religion at all? And all these different things. I'm like, whoa. And I basically get told that I'm going to hell there too. I don't really fit. And also I pass. It can be very confusing for a lot of people, and it makes people very uncomfortable with me because it's threatening. It's disturbing for me to say, there are positives on these different sides, and there are also negatives on these different sides, and my theology doesn't really fit in any of those places.
People fear the unknown.
They do, and I've got a lot of that.
What advice would you give someone who is seeking a spiritual home? You've been coming out and coming out and coming out, and now you're totally out.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that, or they're trying to find their spiritual home. What advice would you give them?
This goes back to some of my personal principles, which I've developed over time. And the thing that I think is the most important is that you, and I say you as anyone, everyone, needs to be their authentic self. They need to be honest and open about who they are and own that. That is a simple thing, but it is not easy. And so it can be tricky to kind of come into that space of owning who you truly are. However, once you do that, it's a lot easier to find the places where you fit and where you don't. I think one of the most beneficial things is when people leave you because you've come out. Because then you know, these people are not my people. This is not my spiritual home. This is not where I belong. I'm done with them. And you can create that boundary and let it go. That's hard. There's some grief there. And it's important to acknowledge that there's grief there and that there's loss with this. And also, it's a celebration because you can release that and you can move on and you can get where you are meant to go. The people who are meant for you will find you once you are owning who you are every time.
I tell people, expect that people will leave you when you come out.
Yeah.
Expect it.
Absolutely.
And that is a celebration.
Yeah.
You probably noticed after you were totally out that you attracted the right people.
Yes. Yeah,
And you grow from there.
absolutely. It's surprising, actually, when certain people will come to you and you're like, oh, I didn't know you were like that. And they were hiding all this time. And then you were like, oh, I just needed to be open about who I am. And then you came and found me.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
You wrote a curriculum on world religions.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
It actually started as a thesis project for my master's program. I was doing a master's in global and international studies. And my idea was that if people from different world religions could work together, we could actually get stuff done. So, so I was like, how can I make that happen? I studied abroad in India for 6 months because I figured, like, if Indians can do it, anybody can do it, right? Because this is like one of the most religiously diverse places in the world, if not the most. And they couldn't. They actually are terrible at it. It was so disappointing, actually. They could not do piecework together except after there was violence at that time. This was back in 2007. So it was like there was a religious riot like once a month, every month. And I was just like, really? This sucks. So I was like, what do I do? How do I, what can I do with this information? So I came back home to the States and I was like, people need to educate themselves. After 9/11, people had all these weird ideas about what a Muslim looked like. And there was a lot of violence against Sikhs who are not Muslim. And there was a lot of confusion about all these different things. And then, you have this history of anti-Semitism and all these different things. I was like, people need to know what these religions are actually about. And so I decided to write this world religion curriculum that was for community organizations. So it could be used in churches or synagogues, but it could also be used at like your local rec center to teach one another about what the similarities are, because there are similarities, and also the differences. Because I figured if you could start to see the humanity in people and start to understand where these beliefs come from and what they're really about, then we can actually have conversations and get stuff done and tackle things like hunger, like war, like water, like housing, like healthcare, things that actually are issues that everybody across faith traditions actually cares about, instead of worrying about cultural stuff that's not particularly useful or helpful for the human condition. That was my goal with writing that curriculum. And then I ended up later, when I finally went to go back and edit it and publish it, I developed an interfaith devotional that kind of helped you walk through the different religious texts in a spiritual way about common points. There's a lot of universal points in these. It was only the top 6 most popular religions, as a starting place. I had like scripture from each of the different holy texts about a given topic, and then like some devotion and conversation pieces to kind of walk people through. So you could do both or one or the other. It really just depended on what people felt led to do. But again, the goal was always the same, is to create understanding and relationships. I mean, there's also exercises within them to help build relationships across different traditions.
Did you actually explore that with a group of people of different faiths to see if that could work?
I've done a lot of interfaith work with different groups, and I have a lot of friends and connections that are of various faiths and philosophies, and they love it. There's actually a number of interfaith organizations across the country in different communities that love to build relationships across these things. But, that's, as they say, preaching to the choir. I don't want to talk with them. I mean, like, yes, cool. I love them. But I want to talk with people who don't already have that. So it's kind of reaching out to people who are sort of interested but don't know how to get started. That's kind of the group that I want to touch with this kind of information and these kinds of conversations. So, that's like training someone to do this curriculum and then having them go and teach it at a community center or taking it back to their church or their synagogue or their temple or wherever.
I think more people need to learn about other religions.
Yeah.
I think it's not offered enough in schools.
It's not.
Universities. That's why, there's so much ignorance.
Yeah, absolutely. It hurts my heart when I see that hatred and misunderstanding between groups of people, because I look at people, and even people that do things I don't like, which is very unpopular. What I'm about to say is going to make somebody like, what is wrong with you, girl? But I see people as people. We do all make mistakes, and we do all have our foibles and our leading edges that we need to work on. And that's why we need to extend compassion to one another. That's why we need to be loving to each other. The person that's having the rough time, the person that's acting in anger or hate, that's the person that needs more understanding. That's the person that needs more love. And who is responsible for doing that? Everyone. We all have to take time to do that. And it's not always easy. And sometimes it's downright hard and it can be painful. And also, we have to do our best.
I wish everybody thought like you. You know how you're going to hell. Some people say you're going to hell. I get those messages on Instagram. I get the people who want to do readings for me. I get all that stuff that you've mentioned. It's like, just leave me alone. Is there one thing that we haven't touched on that you think would be very beneficial to the listeners today?
So when you were talking, I was like, oh God, what would I say? And then I do what I always do, which is I just sink down into my intuition. And the first thing that came to me was, you need to follow your heart. Now, that sounds like an incredibly cliche statement. And somebody at first glance is going to look at that and be like, what? Okay, whatever, live, laugh, love or something. But when I say that, I don't mean this trite thing that you've heard 1,001 times. I'm talking about, you need to actually sink down into your heart and listen to what you're supposed to do. Your heart will tell you. You already know what you're supposed to do. Like whoever's listening to this right now, this moment, this is for you. I'm serious when I say this. I'm like reaching out, and this is for you. You need to listen to your heart. Whatever it tells you, it's right. Don't get confused by your mind. Listen to your heart. Your heart will tell you. It always knows.
It does always know. Our mind can be interference.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing all your psychic knowledge and your information and wonderful advice about finding your people and leaving some people behind. And, you'll grieve. You'll grieve when they leave, but you'll also heal and you'll grow from there.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us for Witchcasting with Theodora Pendragon. Have a burning question or have a topic you'd love Theodora and her guests to discuss on the show? Contact her through Instagram at Theodora Pendragon. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And help us spread the word by leaving us a rating and review and sharing it with your friends. See you next time, and may your magic always shine.